Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Sometimes the best scientific discoveries start with just a chance encounter. Today, we're unpacking an incredible 10-year journey of collaborative research in Brazilian aviation. We're going to look at how two leading researchers, Francisco G.F. da Silva and Vivian Adriano Falcão, turned a shared curiosity into a massive, decade-long scientific agenda. Let's dive right in.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the opening and origins of this research, move on to their major turning point, explore the rapid expansion of their work, and finally look at their scientific maturity and what the future holds for the group.
Part 1. Opening and Origins. The Parallel Paths.
What's really fascinating here is how perfectly these two initial paths complemented each other. Picture this. On one side, you've got Francisco G.F. da Silva over at the Federal University of Ceará. He's deep into applied microeconomics, econometrics, transport economics, basically figuring out how regulations and investments literally shape our infrastructure networks. Then, on a totally parallel track, we have Vivian Adriano Falcão at ITA and the Federal University of Pernambuco. Her focus, laser-targeted on the physical, operational side of things. Think airport infrastructure, passenger wait times at baggage claim, and the actual quality of aeronautical services. They were walking these distinct parallel paths, but the complex world of air transport was already, kind of inevitably, pulling them together.
That brings us to part 2, the turning point, convergence of purpose.
Things started moving really fast. In 2019, their paths finally crossed for real. They started collaborating on environmental efficiency and their very first works on airport concessions. And pretty quickly they realized, hey, we aren't just researching isolated topics anymore. They were actually building a cohesive line of investigation that desperately needed a home. Enter NEFAT Air. Just a year later, in 2020, this evolved into the official creation of AIRGROUP. That's the research group on airports and air transport economics. But the real game changer? That was 2021. They ran a massive bibliometric diagnosis of Brazilian air transport. Now, this wasn't just your standard literature review. It was essentially a treasure map. It highlighted these deep, unaddressed gaps in the research and gave them a crystal-clear direction for their future agenda.
Anchored by some incredibly rigorous data, which you can see mapped out in their extensive CNPK Lattes platform records, this was the exact moment things shifted. The research absolutely stopped being just a neat academic interest. It became a full-blown scientific mission. They had finally locked in a collective identity, and they now held the blueprint for exactly what the Brazilian aviation sector needed to figure out about its own infrastructure.
All right, Part 3, Research Expansion, Unveiling the Aviation Sector.
From there, the ideas just spread like wildfire. Every published article seemed to open a new door, right? They started tackling the most complex, pressing layers of Brazilian airport regulation. First, they analyzed airport competition, specifically zooming in on Brazil's northeast region. Then, when the entire world ground to a halt with COVID-19, they immediately pivoted. They studied the pandemic's massive impact on aviation, everything from cargo demand recovery to how international flights actually contributed to the virus's entry. They also dissected those super intricate concession blocks and contractual arrangements of Brazilian airports. And, perhaps most importantly, they pushed the envelope on socio-environmental efficiency, proving how transportation infrastructure ties directly into sustainable development goals. As the research grew exponentially, the group grew right along with it.
To put that expansion into perspective, let's look at some of their concrete milestones. It's like watching a systematic mapping of reality unfold. In 2022, they dropped critical work on regional competition, and in that same year, provided vital data on the pandemic's intersection with international air transport. Fast forward a bit, and they're publishing in top-tier journals like Transport Policy about the drivers of renegotiation in Brazilian airport concessions. So, why does all of this actually matter to us? Well, because they weren't just sitting back observing the shift from public to private airport management in Brazil. No, they were actively defining the exact economic and operational metrics we need to actually evaluate and improve these massive multi-billion-dollar transitions.
And now, Part 4, Maturity and Future, the 10-year legacy, which leads us to their massive 2026 capstone paper, 10 Years of Brazilian Airport Concessions, Learned Lessons. And this is absolutely crucial to understand. This isn't just another article to add to the pile. It is the ultimate portrait of a collective construction. It takes a full decade of nonstop investigation and synthesizes it into one complete view of an entire economic cycle. It weaves all those crazy layers, the competition, infrastructure, regulation, efficiency, into one definitive retrospective of the whole Brazilian airport concession model. The real magic of this trajectory, though, it's the human capital they built along the way. What started as just two individual researchers with complementary questions is now this incredibly solid group
led by recognized CNPq productivity researchers, Francisco as a Level 2 and Vivian as a Level C. NEFAT, NEFAT Air, and AIRGROUP aren't just acronyms. They've transformed into real-world hubs for training master's and doctoral students. They are generating actionable impact within the Brazilian aviation sector. Seriously, this right here is the sheer force of research when it's built collectively.
But if you know anything about the aviation sector, you know the work is never really done. Their agenda remains incredibly alive today. Looking ahead, they're zeroing in on hybrid governance models. They're pushing for continuous socio-environmental efficiency, figuring out how to actually reduce emissions while keeping things running smoothly. They're also gearing up to analyze future contract renegotiations as the economic landscape inevitably shifts again. And very coolly, they're diving into regional inclusion and technological impacts, like their current work using big data and AI for the National Transport and Logistics Observatory to monitor things like infrastructure and air quality. The sector changes, the country changes, and this research community just evolves right alongside it.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, we really have to acknowledge the entire ecosystem that made this all possible. The colleagues, the students, the partners, and the institutions who walked this path for the last 10 years. It's a celebration of a truly committed community, but it's also a look ahead. So I want to leave you with this to ponder. As we celebrate the building of this scientific community today, what new, totally unforeseen frontiers do you think Brazilian air transport will challenge them and us to explore in the next decade? It's a huge question. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive into a remarkable decade of scientific dedication. Keep questioning, keep collaborating, and we'll catch you next time.